What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the extended cut, minimally edited podcast version of this week's episode, where I'm going to talk about some of the best and worst decisions I've made in my career as a therapist. And in this extended cut version of the episode, you're going to hear all those like little juicy anecdotes, examples, stories to kind of color in and fill in the details about what was actually going on in some of these decisions. So that's what you have to look forward to in this longer version of the episode. And today it's going to be a little bit more of a chit-chatty style episode because I'm only working 2 days this weekend, so I'm keeping it real chill, and I hope you don't mind. But I think it's going to be still a useful episode for some of you. And of course, I'd like to say that just because something was a great decision for me doesn't mean that it's a great decision for everybody else. And just because something was one of my worst decisions doesn't mean that it would be a bad decision for somebody else per se. So just take this as me sharing my own reflections of the best and worst decisions for me. And there may be things that you might pick and choose from there to glean from, but please don't see it as, here's what you should do. I can't believe this, but it's been 16 years now since I first started my training as a psychologist. It's been 12 years since I graduated with my doctorate degree, and now 10 years since I've been licensed as a psychologist, which just feels wild to say out loud. And I can say really confidently that at this point in my career, I feel really happy with my current setup. I know I have a little bit of an unconventional setup right now where I'm only seeing therapy clients 1 day a week, and then most of my income is coming from this online business, but I was still reflecting because even if I rewind back to 2016, 2017, before I started private practice skills and I was seeing therapy clients in private practice full time, I was really happy then too with my career. So hopefully some of my reflections will be relevant, regardless of whether you want to kind of go down this little unconventional path or not. Okay, so let's first dive into what, in my opinion, were some of the best decisions I've made so far in my career. The first, and I think best decision I've made throughout my entire career is following my gut. And that's one of those like wishy-washy things, like what does it mean to follow your gut? But if I go back in my memories to these kind of pivotal moments in my career that had the biggest impact and the biggest positive impact, they tended to be these moments where I was kind of making a leap primarily based on something that I felt somewhere in my gut. I don't know how to better explain it, that felt just so strong and kind of so impassioned that it felt like it wasn't really optional for me. This dates all the way back to when I was 14 years old, dealing with pretty severe panic disorder, treating myself using library books because the internet didn't have all the answers in it back then like it does now. And after doing systematic desensitization on myself and having great success, and after having a very, very terrible therapist for one session, I decided I think I could do a better job at this than that very inappropriate therapist that I had, and I'm only 14. So if I get some training, imagine what I could do. And I just felt like this is my destiny. So I followed it, and it didn't waver at all from 14 until now. That was just me following my gut. I just knew. And that sensation of following my gut really did serve me throughout my career, where I made a lot of career pivots, but they all just felt like they came from in my gut somewhere. From, in graduate school, thinking I was going to specialize in working with kids, spending only a couple of weeks working with kids at internship and realizing that's not for me, letting myself pivot out of that, all the way to leaving a group practice, making a jump from part-time to full-time private practice, to adjunct teaching, to pivoting out of adjunct teaching, to starting private practice skills, and then even within private practice skills, following my gut to kind of change directions as I've gone along the way. So following my gut has tended to serve me well. I wish I had some practical tips on how to identify what your gut is saying, and then how to go about listening to your gut or discerning, is this really my gut or just some other not as helpful voice in my mind or whatever it might be. Nonetheless, me following my gut seems to have made the greatest positive impacts on my career. And following my gut led me into good decisions, I'd argue, even in these really nuanced kind of situations. Like the example that comes to mind the loudest in my memory is, back when I was in graduate school, during my third year, I was applying for pre-doctoral internships, and in my area of San Diego, there were only a very small handful of full-time pre-doctoral internships available. Most of them were part-time and you did them over 2 years. But I really, really, really wanted to prioritize a 1-year full-time internship because my husband was going to have to move for his training after that year, and I really didn't want to be in a long-distance marriage. So I interviewed at these various full-time programs that, offered me an interview. There was like 3, I think, that I interviewed at. And I remember the one that I was banking on the most to work out because, commute-wise, it was the most reasonable commute, and just various reasons, it seemed like that was the one I wanted to go for. I showed up to the interview, and I, first of all, immediately just had bad vibes at this interview. Something just didn't feel right. And then they got to the question where they said, let's say that it's 4 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. Your shift is scheduled to end at 5 p.m. and the psychiatrist asks you to conduct a psychological assessment. What would you do? And it was a group interview. And I was the last in line, so I got to hear everyone else's response, and everyone else said, oh, I would do whatever I needed to do. And they'd say, like, would you come in on the Saturday to finish the assessment? And all of that. And everyone's saying, oh, yes, if I needed to, I would do whatever I needed to get the assessment ready for the psychiatrist. Mind you, back then it took me like 10 plus hours to complete an assessment battery. So they get to me and I'm sitting there thinking, and I said, I'd be willing to do as much as I could before 5 p.m., but most likely I would communicate to the psychiatrist that I'd be happy to start completing the assessment when I came back in on Monday. And I knew immediately when I said that, first of all, I was not going to be offered the internship, but even if somehow I was, it was like, I'm so not going to work here. And sure enough, I didn't get offered the internship. And, lo and behold, only a few months later, when the next cohort had already started at that internship, it came out that the supervisor was in a full-on affair with the postdoc. Both parties were in marriages. Like, the whole thing blew up for many reasons. So I just felt so relieved. Like, yeah, I knew it. When I went in there, I was like, something's not right. Sitting in that room with the postdoc and the supervisor and then the other interviewees, and they're all just sort of like, I think this is the right answer. And I was like, nope. So that's just one story where following my gut served me well. And yeah, I did end up having to commute pretty far to my internship after all. I did end up getting to do a full-time internship though, and I got to always leave the office at the time I was supposed to leave the office by. So I'm really grateful that I dodged that one. Another approach to my decisions that has proven to be successful overall is whenever I'm at a fork in a road making a decision, rather than asking the question, can I actually do that? Instead, I try at least to intentionally ask the question, what's stopping me from doing that? Like, why not? Why can't I do that? And if there's nothing genuinely blocking me from doing something, like, for example, if I'm going to try to do something that I don't have the credentials for or I'm not actually qualified for, of course, I'm going to stop myself. But if I have something that feels like a reach or a dream or just completely a fantasy that might not be possible, if it's legal and ethical for me to try approaching that thing that I'm passionate about, I'm going to just try it and be okay with it not working, but I'm going to try it rather than stopping myself with a question like, oh, is it even okay for me to do that, and just not even trying? And that felt prevalent like throughout my career up until now, like even in undergrad, and I was super young in undergrad thinking like, am I allowed to go to grad school as a 21-year-old to be a psychologist? Like, I don't know, like my brain's not even done developing yet, and yet this is what I want to do. Or when I finished graduate school and I was only 25 and getting offered a position in a private practice to do my postdoc hours, thinking like, can I be in private practice as a 25-year-old? Like, and it turns out, yes, like it's okay. Legally, at least in my state, you can be a postdoc under these certain circumstances in private practice. And so I did it and it worked out. I'm so glad I did it that way. And things like, can I start an online business? Can I just apply to be an adjunct professor and just, try it. And of course I had to apply to like, who knows what, 20 different places. And then I think the job offer that I got was like a total fluke because it was so last minute. I think whoever was lined up must have backed out and it was like a emergency kind of situation. But I got to do it this one time and then realized I don't really want to do that. Start my online business. Can I even do this? Why don't I just try it? Why not? Let me just try it. And so that approach has, I think, served me really well. Another approach to my decisions that I think has just had the best outcomes for my career, and I've spoken about this in a whole video before as well, is to reframe my failures as pivots. So things that look like failures, to just see them as opportunities to pivot, to assume that failure is a necessary and actually helpful part of the career journey. And what I mean by failures, I'm not talking about epic failures or ethical huge failures, but things like, I thought I was going to really want to be a child psychologist. And then I tried it and man, I'm not good at that and I don't like it. Like, is that a failure or is it just a pivot? And I think how we frame those moments in our mind is incredibly valuable in helping us build resilience to say, oh, okay, I just gained some really helpful information. I am kind of tempted to feel like a failure, but actually this is an opportunity for a pivot. So if it's not that, what is it then? Let's explore. And that's happened at so many points along the way. As I mentioned, I made a video along the way talking about how failures are actually successes. So I'll link to that in the notes below. But like before this business, Private Practice Skills, I started so many businesses. I don't even remember all of them. And clearly all of them failed because none of them are here now, or they never even got off the ground. They never generated revenue, or even like the buildup of things that happen before you even get to the point of generating revenue. Some of them were just like ideas that I heavily invested in for like a couple of months or 6 months, and nothing even got started until I realized like this isn't going to work. And so yeah, you could say those are failures, but those all led up to the moment where I did have this successful idea that once I leaned into it, the momentum started building and it worked out. And all of those failures, I learned different things about what I wanted to do with my business and picked up new skills along the way as well that I'm definitely leveraging in this business. So all those failures are really just pivots. And I think making that mindset shift really helps make decision-making a lot simpler. Like, I'm willing to try this, and if it fails, I will pivot. And I think another important element of feeling the freedom to pivot rather than just seeing something as a failure when it doesn't work out is that rather than seeing it as like a constantly unstable process where it's like you keep trying things and they fail and you pivot and then you pivot again. The stability comes from an internal compass. The stability comes from prioritizing certain values like health or other values that might be kind of guiding my, compass forward. And these other things, I might be just trying them on for a bit to see if they align with whatever my ultimate goals are, whatever my ultimate values are that I want to lean into. That felt important to acknowledge because there is this stabilizing element, even if on paper it looks like I just keep pivoting and it seems like I don't know where I'm going, and there is a kind of guiding light underneath all of these things where I'm cycling through things to try to get to maybe some important goal that I have in mind. Okay, I'm looking at my notes and seeing the next best decision on my list and realizing like this one actually I think is the most important one on this list, even though I know earlier I said going with my gut was the most important one. Let me tell you what it is and I'll explain why. I think some of the best decisions that I've made, even though I didn't always, align with this value in every decision, was making decisions based on surrounding myself with healthy people rather than emphasizing some other priority. So for example, there were plenty of times where I placed into practicum or internship based on like, let's say I really want to work with this specific kind of population. And so I'm going to do whatever I can to get that internship that focuses on that specific population. I did that sometimes, but it was much more successful, much more positively impactful on my career if I picked practicum or internship based on there being healthy people immediately around me in those contexts. Usually the supervisor being the healthy person you want to be surrounded by, but it could also be, the team that you're working with and things like that. And when I use that mindset of like, which supervisor that interviewed me amongst, these 3 practicum options, which one of those just felt like I would feel the safest seeing them every week, telling them about my struggles and all of that. When I let that decide which one I prioritized as my top choice, like I never regretted it. And I worked at places that I knew going into them that I wasn't going to be specializing in that sort of workplace or that sort of client population, but I still loved working there because I had great supervisors. And yeah, looking back at other places, when I didn't do that, I just regretted it. And that applies not just in graduate school, but like every step of the way since then, even as, running my own solo practice, running my own solo business, you might say I don't really need to worry about who I surround myself with because I'm solo. But actually, the more solo I've gone in my career, the more I've clung to bringing more and more healthy people around me in every arena that I can, and just clinging to those people and genuinely not giving the time of day to anyone who is disrespectful, toxic, harmful. I mean, that starts on the high level, really important things like, making sure that the people in my consult group are people that I deeply, deeply trust and will come to with literally any kind of issue and feel like I'm going to be okay. And I do feel that with my consult group, surrounding myself with friends and therapist friends who I feel like are just healthy people that I admire so much. I am connected with other female psychologists, entrepreneurs who I feel like are really healthy in how they're approaching their career and their personal lives. And then, of course, my friends and networks in general. I'm trying to surround myself with healthy people as well. But it goes all the way down to things like, do I want to accept this sponsorship for my YouTube channel or not? And I'm remembering this specific story where I was looking at a potential sponsor and getting more information. And what I'd learned so far, it seemed like it aligned pretty well with my channel. And then it got to the point where we scheduled like a Zoom call to talk more. And during the Zoom call, it was like the boss and the boss's assistant interacting. And I saw I heard the little side comments that the boss was giving to the assistant during our call, and he was being very disrespectful to her. And that was enough. I just saw that, you can't even censor that out during your first time meeting with me. I don't even need to hear more. I'm good. And no, I did not call them out, but I just said, you know what? I think I'm realizing that things might not be the best fit for us. And he did actually ask more about why. And I just said there were some things about the workplace culture that didn't just quite align with how I wish to approach things. And then he did acknowledge that, sometimes he can be a bit rough with his assistant person. I forget even the title. But for me, that was I don't even need to give this a second chance because I have enough abundance of healthy options elsewhere. And so I think those choices have really helped me a lot. Okay, and the next one I realize might get kind of like a mixed bag of responses because this is definitely one of those things where it's the best decision for me, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I think other people should take the same approach. I really mean that. But for me, one of the best decisions that I've made for my career is declining really expensive trainings when it's something that I'm able to learn on my own, DIY, doing enough Google searches, or even just consulting with enough folks who have been down that road before. And I'm not talking about getting credentialed in some sort of clinical tool. I'm talking about business related trainings. If I want to get credentialed in some clinical tool, no matter how much it costs, I will pay for it. But I'm talking about things like learning how to grow your practice or learning how to grow your online business. Whenever I have forked out money for those really expensive trainings, I still always, even if I didn't fully regret it, I just felt I didn't really need that. And I also spent a lot of money on it. Early career Marie, there was no way I did not have the budget, period, to fork out for some of these trainings, as amazing as they might have been. I mean, 2012 Marie, just starting out in private practice, there was not $2,500 in my bank account if I wanted it to pay for something like this, I would have had to skip rent or something. It just was not feasible at all. And even if that training was just absolutely fabulous, like you need the money somewhere to pay for it, and I did not have it. I also absolutely refuse to go into credit card debt for any purpose whatsoever. That's just a personal value of mine. So that was also not an option for me. But even since then, where, I'm in a place where if something makes sense for my business, yeah, I do have $2,000 or $5,000 available for a training if it's going to actually be fruitful for me. But I still follow the same approach where I try to see if I can DIY things, figure things out on my own, or, consult with enough people to kind of help me get in the direction that I want to go. And I think part of the advantage of this is it's allowed me to craft my own route. I notice that a lot of the advice that I give doesn't necessarily align with what other people are saying because I am largely self-taught. And by being self-taught, I got to kind of structure things in the way that I like. And the way that I like doing things may not be the way that makes sense for somebody else or that somebody else might like doing things, but it does create kind of maybe a little bit of a different voice in the stratosphere. There's this one story in particular that lives in this category that's standing out in my mind, and I haven't shared it publicly because I am just not interested in bashing how other people do things, but I think it's been long enough that I'm not naming anybody specifically, but there was a point earlier on in private practice skills where we'll just say somebody else who's prominent in the same niche that I'm in invited me to their mastermind group. And I think maybe it met once a month, maybe twice a month. I don't know how long the meetings were for, but I found out that the cost of the mastermind was $650 a month, which at that point in private practice skills, I was not generating income yet for private practice skills. So I would have had to have paid for that from my therapy practice income. And I hadn't spent any money on private practice skills at all. I was just making videos and that's it. I wasn't generating income or anything like that, selling anything. I didn't have sponsors, nothing. I remembered really thinking about it for a couple of days, thinking like, do I need to spend $650 a month to get to a point where I have this business that aligns with what I want it to be? And I kind of felt that pull, like, I guess there's other people doing it. So I guess that's what I'm supposed to do. And perhaps those other people who were in that group thought it was fabulous and amazing and it suited them well. And that can all be totally true. But for me, I had that gut feeling of like, I don't feel right giving $650 a month to this thing that's sort of elusive. Like it's a group coaching call. Am I really going to feel like I gained $650 worth of money from that when I think what I'm doing right now is actually getting me headed in the right direction and I'm already liking it? And I'm so grateful that I declined. It just feels like I got to do it my way on my terms, and that's something that fits better for me. So I think that suited me well. And yeah, at some point I saw like they posted who was in that mastermind somewhere on the internet. And I remember thinking like, yeah, the brands of those folks are kind of similar to each other and not quite the branding that I'm wanting to put out there. So I just kind of felt grateful that I didn't have to feel like I was swimming upstream in a group like that and spending money that maybe I would have regretted spending. I definitely would have regretted spending that money. I know. And the last thing that I'll say contributed to some of the best decisions I've made in my career is just, it's a tendency of mine that I used to feel ashamed about. And now I feel like it's my superpower. I'm so grateful for it. And that's my tendency to question and doubt anything that seems remotely fishy or even just confusing to me. Like I will ask the questions annoyingly so. I think I've gotten a little bit better about how to be tactful about doing that, but I just have so many memories of sitting often in group meetings where there's other people around not asking any questions, where somebody will announce something and I'll go, sorry, excuse me. Could you clarify what you meant by this? And usually it becomes immediately clear I'm not supposed to be asking these kinds of questions. Like, for example, going back to that same group interview I mentioned previously, where I said I wasn't willing to come in on the weekends to do an assessment. I also remember as they were talking about your typical workday and things like that, I'm in this group of like 5 of us in the interview and no one's asking questions. But as I'm hearing them talk, I'm thinking like, okay, if I did that and that and that and that and that and that, and that, like in my mind, this sounds like a 50-hour, 60-hour work week. And we're told explicitly, like this is supposed to be a 40-hour work week, max 45 hours. And so I remember at some point in that interaction, I waited for a lull in the conversation. I said, I'm so sorry, I got a question. As you're mentioning these things, I'm kind of keeping track of how many hours that would be. Like, what would you say a typical work week would entail? Like, how many hours should we expect to work in a typical work week? And they said, 50 to 60 hours, sometimes 65. I remember just thinking, like, that's unacceptable all by itself. It's extra unacceptable because we wouldn't be getting paid. P.S. We pay our school tuition in order to get credits for the predoctoral internship. So we're in the hole money-wise. Also, we're supposed to be doing the most critical parts of our dissertation work at this time, which I was spending, 15 to 25 hours a week at least on. And we also have to commute to weekly supervision. So I'm sorry, when am I going to do 50 to 65 hours? I didn't say that, but I did ask more questions about like, I'm curious, like, do other pre-docs seem to be able to manage that schedule and things like that. I just knew that I was not going to be offered this internship. But I'm usually the one to ask questions. And generally, if somebody's not being explicit about something, sometimes it's just like, oh yeah, thank you for asking, let me answer that. But usually if someone's not being explicit about something and I have to ask a lot of questions, it's usually because I'm finding something fishy that they were trying to hide and hoping that no one would ask about it. And I'm going to ask about it. So that's helped me uncover so many things. And I could trail off on that one quite a bit because I often get labeled as a complainer and sensitive. And you know what? I am a complainer and I am sensitive because if I see something that isn't right, I'm going to ask about it. I'm going to call it out. And I don't like how I feel when people don't treat me with respect. The same respect that I want to treat other people with. I don't expect extra respect, just like the same or even just like something like close, There's a definite subtext to that whole thing that I'm not going to trail off on this video of just, especially being a woman. And at that time, earlier in my career, being a particularly young woman as well, asking questions was always perceived negatively pretty much universally. Even now, it's like, why are you asking questions? Just be grateful or whatever. And it's like, I want information. Like, can you tell me what's going on? I just want details and how, there's just a precedent for that not being perceived in a positive light. And I think that reinforces for so many of us, anyone in general, but especially if you're a woman or any sort of minority group, to just say, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut because people are going to see me in a different way than I want to be seen, or it's going to, deprive me of this job opportunity or whatever. And so let's work on that. Let's encourage question asking just in general, always, in all contexts, but especially if you're in a position of some sort of power or authority. Please encourage the people who are, trying to be in your good graces to ask questions. And stepping into some of the worst decisions that I've made, and you maybe have kind of caught on that these are like categories of decisions rather than like that singular decision. But some of the worst decisions I've made in my career have been connected to me taking the advice of people that I didn't really respect, but I felt like I needed to take their advice because they seemed to have more authority or more experience than I did. Like, this goes all the way back to undergrad, where I went to a very academic institution. Like, none of my psychology professors had even seen a therapy client once. In that context, like, all my professors advocated for getting a doctorate degree. And I've shared before, like, if I could do my career over again, like, I don't need a doctorate degree for what I'm doing. I'm not anti-doctorate, just like, no need to get extra training if you're not going to use the extra training for something. I'm just using the master's level training for the work that I'm doing. And, doctorates are expensive. All of it's expensive, but doctorates are more expensive. So, and having all my professors like push for doctorates and thinking like, well, I was like 20 or whatever. And like, I guess I should listen to them because they know what they're doing. And looking back like, no, I knew I didn't need a doctorate for what I wanted to do, but I listened to them. And that continued on throughout my career, like professors pushing like, you have to get an APA internship. And meanwhile, like, they weren't equipping us to be, competitive in the APA internship kind of landscape. So very few people from my cohort did an APA internship. Nonetheless, we all felt the pressure, and I did a KPIC accredited internship, which if you don't know what those words are, it's just less competitive, but you're still fully qualified to do all of the things, except for a very few exceptions of things like, maybe working at the VA or something, but I knew I didn't want to work at the VA. Anyway, I didn't end up in an APA internship, but I felt that pressure the whole time and even while I was in my internship, that feeling like I was doing something wrong. So this idea of like not only making decisions based off of people that I don't totally respect, but think maybe know better than me, but also just like carrying the shame of when I didn't make a decision that aligned with what they suggested, just feeling like I chose the wrong path or I did the wrong thing. When looking back, that wasn't true. That was the best thing that made sense for me at the time. And I've heard all kinds of advice from people who seem to know better than me, or like they're supposed to know better than me, that has just been proven not true. Like that I wouldn't be able to be successful in private practice, that I'd need to, publish my dissertation in order to launch my career, that I'd never make money from an online business, like on and on and on. And these people who sort of quote unquote know better, well, it turns out they were wrong, at least for me. And yeah, it was generally advice from people that I didn't particularly respect to begin with. So I already had enough information to say I don't need to listen to what they're saying. And another variable that kind of led to worse decisions along the way in my career was hurrying. Like any point along my career, hurrying just took me out of my body, really. And I was capable of doing a lot of stuff without listening to my body, my mental well-being. And so there'd be these moments along the way in my career where I'd be on such a hurrying mindset that I didn't realize that I was hungry. I didn't realize that I was really tired, but I hadn't slept like hardly at all, like pulling all-nighters, writing the dissertation frequently, taking on way too many jobs in my early career, commuting all over the Bay Area. I think it was like 100 plus miles a day most days, and taking on jobs that also like paid poorly. Anyway, I made so many poor decisions when I was hurrying, and just maybe hurrying was a symptom of something beneath that. I think it is, but if I'm in a hurried state, I think it's just a signal that I'm probably not attuned to making wise choices in that moment. That's a good moment to hit pause, slow down, and access any tools to help me not hurry so I can get back into my body and, get back into listening to my gut and all of that. And the third contributor to some of my worst decisions was saying yes to opportunities simply because I was excited that I was offered the opportunity, even if it didn't align at all with like any of my projected goals, and even if it costs me something. This is kind of a silly example, but I just remember it so prominently from graduate school where one, again, people that I didn't particularly respect pushed this on me and I just listened. But two, it just felt like I have this opportunity where I signed up for an extra internship. Like I didn't have to do it to graduate. I signed up for an extra internship to do psychological assessments, which I knew already before I signed up for that internship that I did not want to do psychological assessments for my career because I really, really don't like doing them. Like I really, really don't like doing them. And I signed up for this unpaid internship that cost me extra school credits to do, to commute 40 miles away multiple times a week to do these assessments on top of my dissertation, full school work, and part-time internship that year. And it was just chaos. And I did it. I said yes because the opportunity was there. I forget, I was like invited or something. Like it felt special to me that that opportunity was there. So I said yes. And that benefited me in no ways at all. Like except to just re-solidify that I don't like doing psychological assessments, but I already knew that. So there's a lot of like smaller stories like that. I don't think I made any like, earth-shattering career changes because I said yes to an opportunity that just because the opportunity was there. But those moments never helped me. And I'm glad that doesn't tend to be my default state. I'm sure there's more things I could say, but that's the end of my notes for today. And I feel like I already said quite a bit already. So I hope you enjoyed going on like a little bit this walk down memory lane with me and just reflecting on what sorts of things have helped me make the best decisions in my career and what variables have kind of contributed to my worst decisions. Let me know in the comments if there's any kind of categories of decision making that you think work really well for you or others that just don't work, because I'm always curious to hear what works well or not for other people as well. I think other people can glean from your wisdoms as well, because I'm just one person, and even if you have a very different perspective than me, it's so helpful to hear it. So feel free to let folks know in the comments below. Well, thanks for hanging with me. This felt pretty chit-chatty, maybe a little ranty at times. Thanks for hanging with the more chill editing style that I know I'm going to use in this episode. And I hope you feel supported in some way just from hearing me share some of these thoughts. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.